Alrighty. So in our little presentation, we're going to be talking about, I know all of you guys already know a ton about balloons. So you guys will definitely know what we're talking about, but we're going to be talking about the balloon we launched for the spring Equinox race and how much fun we had with it and what we learned and what we think other youth can learn from it. And once again, I'm Audrey McElroy, came for BUN, and Jack came for ZIA. So what is a Pico sat balloon? If you heard about our little balloon, came for ZIA-3, it flew around the world for 85 days, which was pretty impressive considering the ones we launched before were quite trial and error. Some of them going up and, losing them just a day or two later. So in our case, we had a payload, which was obviously Bill Brown's Sky Tracker, which was he's very generous to let us use those, and they're a lot of fun. And so ours happening around the world for 85 days.
And so yes, our balloon went around for about 85 days, and the main reason why it stayed up for that long was because it was at about 41,000 feet or 13 kilometers, hence the name SBS 13. And so when it was at 41,000 feet, it basically allowed it to stay above almost all the rain clouds, since, it's getting almost out of the troposphere. So as you can see in the image there, only like the very tops of even these humongous rain clouds are barely even touching us. And so as a result, there are very few ways that our balloon could really be lost. A few of those could be from icing on the balloon that could eventually just make it decrease in altitude. The second one is it's maybe being in a storm, maybe being, frustrating a little bit. But then also UV basically ripping away at the seams of the balloon, and basically it lose helium or hydrogen depending on what you're using to fill your balloon, and so that will cause it to eventually go down. And also helium will actually migrate out of the balloon itself, which will make it also lose altitude and eventually just disappear.
Right. So even theoretically, if we stayed out of the ways of storms and everything, at some point, right, Jack, it would come down eventually.
Oh yeah.
Just from permeation through the balloon itself. And so if we touch on, what we launched was a super pressure balloon. And so if, it looks like a giant trash bag, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so at some point that helium or that hydrogen, like Jack said, does have to migrate through, and eventually you'll lose it. So an important question is, how do you get to 13 kilometers but no higher? It's the same question when you're a kid, when you let go of a birthday balloon, you say, oh, does it just go up into outer space? And, it doesn't. And we know that when you get older, but it's important you have to do the math behind it, and you to figure out, okay, it's going to go this high. And the best part is all the gas laws and the buoyancy behind that. And so you have to know when it gets to a point where the pressure on the outside is equivalent to the pressure on the inside, it's not going to rise any higher. And so in that case, that's why, as you all know, if you see a super pressure balloon, if you see one of the Mylar balloons, here at ground level, it barely has any lift. But we know that's important because as we go up, the volume of the balloon is just going to expand. So we fill it up all the way down here on Earth, it's going to pop.
Yeah. So as I already said, it includes math, and especially buoyant force. And we use the name buoyant force. Of course, it can be like a force like pushing a friend or like throwing a ball and it lands on the ground. But its buoyancy in this case relates to pressure and relative density of two or more objects. An example is like pushing a beach ball down to water. It's very, very little dense, and so it's going to come right back up. But if you drop like a lead ingot down the water, it's going to sink to the bottom. And so it's the same thing with our balloons, except that it's in air, the balloon in the air. So the balloon is, the helium is less dense than the air surrounding it, or hydrogen. And so it's going to go up, and it continues going up and up. And of course, as we know, if we continue going up in the atmosphere, air density decreases, or the amount of molecules per column of air. And so, as Audrey said, it'll just, continue expanding until it reaches a certain threshold, or like with an HCB, a latex balloon, it'll just continue going up until it pops.
Right. Yeah. The important thing Jack just said is that, right, we know super pressure balloons will go up and expand, and they won't expand. They'll stay at that altitude, what is referred to as float altitude. So it'll pretty much stay there. And right, Jack, that's what we kind of found with our balloon.
Yeah, our SPS 13 balloon, the reason why it just goes up and stays at 13 feet is because it has a film on it, on the balloon itself, called Heptax, which is a Japanese-made film, which came from the American-made, I believe, bio-PET film, or PET film, that was originally used in balloons like in the 50s, 60s, but it is advanced a lot, and so it's like a trash bag. If you like inflate with air, you can't inflate anymore. And so same thing with these balloons, they continue getting bigger and bigger until they can't stretch anymore. And at that point, they just stop going up, and so they stay at a pretty much a fixed altitude.
Yeah. So it was fun to watch our balloon when that happened, because it stayed at the same altitude. It didn't vary more than probably a couple hundred feet either way. And so that's pretty interesting to study and look at. And the math and physics behind it is very interesting as well. So like we kind of just said, we got ahead of ourselves a little bit. The reason this process expansion stops because the balloon can't stretch past that point. Like we said, latex balloons go up to however high, usually 100,000 feet or some odd, and they end up popping. But in our case, these like to float around. And that's why ours stayed up for 85 days instead of, a few hours. And so this is how you can kind of work in math and science, so school curriculums with ballooning. So today, if you've seen on Facebook or anything, there's a lot of groups getting in all over the country, schools getting into ballooning. And Jack, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of groups getting into ballooning, and actually from a presentation back, you actually heard Alabama, University of Alabama. And so even in Georgia, we're getting kids involved in balloons. So we have Kelly Mill, which is a elementary school near us, that Audrey actually taught kids about balloons, and even launched a Mylar balloon there. And it really helps to really get these kids get into ham radio with balloons, because with Mylars, they're really cheap to make and to send off. And so as a result, it's a good precursor to get kids in ham radio, and eventually, they'll be getting into much more advanced stuff, especially like antenna propagation, all of that.
And, it's also great for teachers as well, working in, I know here in the state of Georgia, at least, we have to have physical science credits, and a lot of kids do that their 8th grade year. And so it's great for teachers to work in those buoyancy laws, ideal gas laws and everything into balloons, because they're the perfect example pretty much. And that's a great picture of an actual, a nice super pressure balloon. Like it says here, if you have the budget of NASA, you can do that. But for us, we stay with our little SPS 13s. And that's just a little bit of the math from a previous presentation we did, talking about lift for, I want to say, one of the Mylars.
Yes, it's for one of just the little Mylars you can get, like one Mylar balloons they can get from Balloons Fast, like where Bill Brown gets his balloons. It's just calculations about its buoyant force. And so this is pretty much a good chunk of the math that you'll be doing if you want to launch these balloons. So you can calculate this, you'll determine how much lift you need, all of that.
This is a little screenshot from one of our videos. If you happen to see the Yoda 2020 online summer camp, because of COVID, that wasn't able to happen. So we did an online video, and we had a lot of fun, right, Jack?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So in that video, we're doing a Mylar balloon setup. If you're interested in checking it out, it's on my YouTube channel, just by the name. Yeah, so Jack, why don't you tell them a little bit what we did in that video?
Well, in that video, it was my sister Audrey and me going over balloon physics, inflating a balloon. In this case, we're just using a party balloon, an actual party balloon that we got from Kroger's, because well, we didn't really want to risk using a Mylar. So, but you can see in the bottom right, you can see the Mylar balloon there. But you can see I understand we're using the party balloon, and in the middle bottom of it, you can see the picosat. So we are just displaying how to attach picosat to the balloon, how to fill up the balloon, physics of the balloon, how to calculate its free lift, the buoyant force, all that.
Yes, and yeah, the reason we were using the Kroger one is one of the methods we started to adapt in our recent launches, implementing some mock test balloons. So test balloons that have the same amount of lift and that ascend at the same rate are going to give us an accurate representation of what's going to happen if we launch right then and there with the actual balloon. So we know, okay, if we launch it, it's going to go into a tree. So we'll know that before we launch the actual one, because it's not fun to launch it and then see it go into the tree. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. We've come close, right, Jack?
Yes, we have come very close to it going into a tree. And I think one time we may have even gone one into a tree a little bit after we launched it. So that's definitely a reason why you should have test balloons on hand, whether they be, just as little tiny latex party balloons, or even just bigger one like the Mylar party balloons like what we have. So what even we did was we tethered a balloon to a string connected to a weight, and we let it go about like 50 feet into the air, and just flew and acted as a sort of like a windsock.
Yes. Yeah, we had two different types of kind of like test balloons. So we had ones that were stationary in the ground that were tethered down. We saw the wind pattern. So like Jack said, it was a windsock. And then other ones, what do we use? Cardboard, I think, for.
Yes, I believe so.
So we did that. We did some of the math and basically mimicked the same amount of lift. So we would know if the whole thing was going to be a failure or not ahead of time. Let's see. Next one. And here is our super pressure balloon all laid out. It's quite delicate. We have to lay out foam and we have to use our gloves and stuff because it's, you really don't want to actually handle it that much. Jack, why don't you talk about all the procedures and the process a little bit?
Yeah, I'd say when you're inflating the balloon, all that, it's less, you can touch it a little bit, unlike the latex balloon where you basically cannot touch it because your finger oils. Above the SBS, you still don't want to touch it because you can mess up the film, and it can even cause micro tears in the balloon, which basically either don't let it get up to its set altitude, or just basically cause it to just eventually lose its helium and disappear. And so what we did was we basically folded the balloon in half so it was easier to handle and manipulate. And then we just, we even got some Krylon tape, the orange tape that you can get. And we just basically used that to keep the balloon folded in half. So definitely be more careful with an SBS 14 balloon than, say, a Mylar. Since Mylars, you don't really have to wear that much. SBSs, you still want to wear some gloves, or at least not touch it a good bit. Like if you're just like putting it on a table, you're holding the you'll tab on it for putting the hose for your helium in there, or your tube. So definitely be mindful of that, because that could cause your balloon to not maybe go around the world, not go to set altitude. So
definitely they're not as they don't take as many hits as the Mylar ones from online. Yeah, and that's our setup we had going on. We basically had we had our tube of our tank of helium coming out with this hose, and we actually attached the hose, this little tiny white tube that Bill Brown attached to one of his packages to us, and we used that to fill it up. And that's just how we did it. We kind of threw that together, right, Jack? That whole little connection.
Yeah. We have the helium tank on the dolly for mainly transportation. because you don't want to be lugging around a big huge helium tank with you, but also so we can lay it on the ground a little bit easier and basically manipulate it better. And on there we don't have a helium regulator on it, but probably should get one. We actually have one. You just screw it into your helium tank, or there's some for hydrogen as well. You screw it into your helium tank, and there's basically a, like, on ours is black tip that you can just push down. It can very accurately meter out your air for you, so you can get very precise fillings for your balloon. So you can make it almost exactly neutrally buoyant, which basically doesn't go up or down, but stays in a neutral position.
Right. And in this case, this was actually this was not the filling of the Midnight Rider Wonder Balloon. This was a previous one. And yeah, so in the Midnight Rider, we had a little bit different setup. We did use the balloon regulator in that one just to get that, we could minutely change our helium without, exploding the balloon. Because as you can see there, like Jack said, there's no regulator there. So that was kind of touchy. But we employed that and it worked out better. And then also, as you can see, I have a little scale there with the weight on it, and we're just checking the amount of free lift every now and then just to make sure we're, getting to where we need to be and not, drastically far off or anything. That's a close-up of it. And yeah, like it says here, it's important to get that hands-on work. Another point for kids in school, teachers in school who want to do this, it's a great hands-on activity. Teaches you real life, like I said, real life gas laws. And who doesn't like to launch big balloons into, the atmosphere? Everybody does. So as you can see there, we have a little 50 grand weight. And what we have to do is we have to, as you all are all balloon people, so I don't really have to go into detail, but right, we sum all of our all the masses of everything, and then we make sure we have that, and we have our free lift, and basically that's how that all works. And so we just make sure we get there with the weight, and it's all good. Yeah, and that's pretty much a continuation of that. And you can see it pretty much, it seems kind of risky, but you basically just hole punch into the bottom of the balloon, right? And you use a little piece of Kapton tape, right, Jack?
Yes. And as the last slide said, you definitely gotta make sure you have all of your weight in there, even with tape, since that can matter a lot in your launch. So as you can see, 6.33 grams of free lift. That's very important that you get perfectly. And what we do is we attach the balloon to basically a little scale, or sorry, not Yule scale, a Yule weight. And we basically measure out, we put the weight on the scale, and we attach the balloon. We inflate the balloon as it keeps getting more and more inflated. It, of course, is going to pull on the weight more, which is going to reduce the weight of the weight. And that'll eventually tell us when we have achieved our perfect amount of free lift.
Yeah. And so, as you can see, we have our hole punch with our Kapton tape reinforcing that, and a little paper clip there to keep it hooked. And let's see, I don't know if there's a picture of this in here, but oh yeah, there kind of is. If you can see down there, we have our little heat sealer, and in the general instructions, right, it just says to heat seal it a few inches above, kind of where you did the whole hole punch thingy. And our approach this time with the Midnight Rider was different. We actually did 2 seals on it, and we double folded it. And I mean, it worked out, we think. We think maybe that helped in its longevity a little bit, but it also may have created a little pocket of air that may have expanded. So, I mean, we were experimenting, right, Jack?
Yeah, and we're still experimenting now.
As always. Yeah, and Jack, you guys have a couple big launches coming up, don't you?
Yes, especially with Yoda Camp, or Youth on the Air Camp in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we'll be launching a couple milers and even a high altitude balloon there with kids of all ages. And I'll be teaching them all about balloons.
Yeah. So Jack is going to be the wonderful teacher. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to be there. But yeah, so be sure to keep up with Jack's balloons. And Jack, are you excited?
I am very excited because it'll really be my it'll be my first time teaching a whole class, which would be really fun. So
Jack you're all prepared to teach about all the math and the physics and everything. It'll be a lot of fun for the kids. So
yeah.
learning experiences for kids. Okay. And here we are. This was one of our super pressure balloons, fully inflated. Like we said earlier, and like you all know, it just looks like a trash bag that someone ran around the front yard with. It's like barely inflated. But gas laws, like we said. What we found on some of our earlier super pressure launches was that we would launch in the middle of the day, right, Jack?
Yes, we were launched in the middle of the day. Unbeknownst to us, since the sun would basically heat the earth and it increased winds for solar heating, and now basically cause pretty much all our balloons basically be taken down by heavy winds and storms off our coast, off Georgia and Florida and South Carolina. So for the Midnight Rider, I was sadly asleep for it, but my sister, she was outside, Audrey, she was outside, and she realized that there's no wind. And so she realized it's a perfect time to launch. And so my whole family got out there, sadly not me, and they got ready to launch Midnight Rider, and they did. And of course, as you heard, it was a tremendous launch, made around the earth 5 times, 85 days. So a really good lesson learned is best time to launch is very late in the afternoon, twilight, midnight almost, or very early in the morning, like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I went outside to take the trash out at 11:30, I was like, it's pretty calm out here. And let me tell you, I don't think there's been a person ever who's inflated a super pressure balloon faster than me at that moment. I was like, we're going to launch this right now. There's no winds. And it worked. And we actually have a video, I think, coming up in a second about that. Okay, Jack, I'll let you talk.
So as to the words of Isaac Newton, the reason why that me and Audrey are getting this high is because we're staying on Solar's Giants, and especially the work done in the Ghost program. And the Ghost program was actually ones that are using the biofilm or the the PET film or the bio-PET film I talked about earlier. And so they basically pioneered basically all of what we're doing right now with super pressure balloons. And so they're part of the National Center of Atmospheric Research, and during the Global Horizontal Sonic Technique, or the GHOST program. And so they basically pioneered, especially their payload, which used solar panels on it, not just as a power source, but also a way to tell listening stations where it was on Earth through triangulation. And with basically the sun shining on the solar panels, it'll basically change the rate of Morse code coming out of the payload, which basically told stations on the ground whether it's in sunlight or not, where its location is based on the sunlight. So you may be in where we are, Georgia, and it may be, and it's like middle of day here, but then we're receiving Morse code from like a payload it's really slow Morse code, say 2 words per minute. And so it may be over Europe, Eastern Europe. And so it may be in like twilight there or evening. And so now it told people where it was. So that is basically very early forms of these tracking payloads that we have.
Yes. And this is a cool little photo, not ours. But this is actually what our super pressure balloon looks like, right, Jack? It's pretty cool.
Yes, these are balloons, or at least NASA balloons, when they become fully inflated. So they look drastically different than the trash bags that you see on the ground going up. These become very rigid in structure because the equalization of pressure as it goes up in altitude. And so as a result, it just becomes rigid, stays at the fixed altitude, as I said before. So here's a perfect image to basically show you what that looked like.
It is a rare photograph, like it says here. It's pretty cool to get that picture. And I'm gonna, let's see, I have a little video of us launching it. I know it's a video on screen share. We'll see if the audio comes through. If it doesn't, it's okay. Jack asleep. Yeah. So that was just a little bit of our whole launch, which was pretty cool. So let's see, we'll get back to here. Yeah, that not sure if you guys hear the audio or not. It's okay. It was like it wasn't really anything too much, but essentially it was me sitting there saying, "Oh boy, I hope this one works." So yeah, it was definitely a change launching it at night, but it ended up paying off, as we know. All right, Jackal, you go.
Okay. So how do we collect flight telemetry data? Well, the payload we have is a Picosat Sky Tracker made by Bill Brown, WB8ELK. He was in a meeting before, and we would like to really thank him for it, since it's a great tracker and payload for anyone's balloon, whether it be a HAB, a SBS, a Mylar. Great sky. It's a great tracker because it can really work on 2 meters, 20 meters depth, because those are pretty much two bands that you're going to be using most when you're launching balloons. And so for us, we're using a 20 meter vertical halfway dipole. And it was basically suspended on the string that connected the balloon to payload, and which allowed us to basically propagate our signal in a much bigger footprint than like on VHF or UHF. And so that allowed us to basically contact stations while we were over like Asia, and allow us to contact stations in like Hawaii. And so it basically helped us know where the balloon was better, because if like a balloon and your balloon's going over like say Siberia, no one may pick up your signals, since they don't know, since there's no listening stations in line of sight radius to really pick up your signal. But 20 meters, it's much bigger. So people in Hawaii, Europe, even Americas, Australia can pick you up on whisper, big signal propagation report for 20 meters. And then for 2 meters, as I said before, it'll be using APRS.FI, which is basically the Sky Tracker sends out a almost like digital to a iGate or internet gate, and that internet gate picks up the code that I received from the Sky Tracker, which is flying around on Earth, and it basically changes that into human language. And it'll tell you its the balloon's coordinates, how fast it's going, its bearing, what its voltage is, and so with that, it shows up on APRS.FI. But what Bill Brown gave us is a Python script they wrote that will basically interrogate the Whisper database for the info on the balloon from 20 meters, and transfers that data to APRS by finding your call sign, and it's a packet of data that or code of data that came from the balloon, and it puts that info into APRS.FI, so you can track it better. So it'll show you more precise location down on Whisper.
And we'll have to credit our dad here for this, the Luke Sky Tracker photo. It's pretty cool. But yeah, okay. And this is KM4ZIA-3, which is the Midnight Rider, the one that lasted for 85 days. I believe this was its first orbit of the globe. We were very surprised, I'll be honest, when it was able to make it out as far as it did and for as long as it did, because like Jack said earlier, all of our balloons in the previous months we launched, like we said, during the day. And what they would do is, because it was during the day, they would follow those wind patterns down to the coast of Savannah, at which it would get, it was pretty much knocked out of the sky. So everything, we were, kind of sad about that. But with launching at night, we found, hey, it works pretty well. And it was able to actually get out over the ocean with the chance, and made it. And so these are some of the cool places it went pretty closely directly over. Funny enough, you realized how, well, I realized at least how, we see Google Maps all throughout the US, but you go else around the world and, it's pretty barren. But it's pretty cool to see where this kind of went over in the world. Some really interesting places.
So in this picture, most people will recognize it from Bill Brown's presentation. And so this is, again, from where they filmed the Star Wars Tatooine scene in New Hope. And so it was pretty awesome to see that our balloon was going over this area of Tunisia. And it really just gave us, a sense of, just like, I guess, pride seeing our balloon going over such a famous location like this. But as Bill Brown said, our balloon does not have a camera yet, but people are experimenting with putting balloons on Mylar payloads, and maybe someday cameras will be on SBS balloons as well.
Oh, that would be very interesting. Let's see. Yeah. Another point is for especially bringing in kids, not only into STEM, but also into other disciplines in school, talking about geography and cultures throughout the world. It's very interesting to see. You just drop a Google, Maps pin wherever it is, and you see these different people, and you see where they live, and you see the world. And even though you're not actually there, it's almost like you're vicariously living through the balloon and where it goes. So it's very interesting to see, all the fun places. Himalayan mountains in Tibet, Nepal. Some more fun mountain pictures. No, Jack, let you talk.
So our balloon flew over this area where we believe is a mosque in right over Turkmenistan. And so it flew 41,000 feet. Of course, it's set altitude. And, as Audrey said, all this really teaches people a lot about cultures and geography. It really opens your eyes to, all of the world instead of, our tiny little view of our country. So, yeah, so not only does ballooning teach the atmosphere and weather and buoyant forests, but also teaches kids about geography, mapping, cultures, all of that. So, other great benefits of getting kids into ballooning.
Yeah, and we always love to see that side of it as well. There's a heavy STEM side to ballooning and amateur radio, but it's also great to see the other aspects that amateur radio can bring. And basically, just learning about the rest of the world. So moving kind of in the other direction. This was after our first orbit. So we're going on our second orbit at this point, using the HabHub tracker, which is actually, it's really nice because you can go back in time all the way and see all the orbits, which I have a screenshot of and I'll show at the end. There you go, Jack. Okay.
So as I was talking about before, WhisperNet. So Whisper, or weak signal propagation reporting net, is basically a program system that basically shows you other stations that are picking you up. Now, these don't have specifically BI gates or internet gates that are stationed like skyscrapers or mountains, these are basically just normal stations. Like as you can see here, VK4CT in Australia, or GH1ARY in Japan. So there can be, these act stations. There can also just be dedicated listening stations, and these are especially prevalent in Russia. And these stations are pretty much they carry you a good bit when you're over these desolate regions like in China, Siberia, and so they can really help you with tracking your balloon.
Right. Yeah, and that's where HF also comes in handy. With some of the other Mylar balloons we've launched that are APRS, sometimes if you're over an area where there's no, like Jack was talking about eye gates, you're not going to see it. So HF comes in handy for all that. WhisperNet, as Jack just talked about, it's also interesting because you can see the gray line in off propagation, which is especially fun in the HF world in 20 meters. We know the rule that 20 meters isn't usually good until afternoon, but it's also just fun to see it with your balloon in all the places it's able to get picked up by on WSJTX. And some more fun places it was. And this was really interesting. So we were, I believe Bill Brown did tell us about this. So it's really fun on HabHub if you have something for Awesomes came for ZI-3. You're able to do a path prediction on it, which we didn't know about. And it's really interesting because it'll show you the different predictions of where it thinks it's going to go using data from NOAA at different altitudes. So, Jack, why don't you tell them about some of the more crazy patterns it predicted?
Well, when we're going past Japan over here, once you're past it, there's one time, not this prediction specifically, but we got a prediction that we're going to do a complete loop-de-loop. So we're going to go up and we're going to come back down over same location and continue straight. So that was really cool to see because a lot of times these predictions are almost really correct. And so it's just really cool seeing these crazy predictions. And especially were pretty cool when we got to northern like Alaska, northern Canada, Nunavut, and Greenland. We're basically doing loops all over the place. Very weird balloon path there's taking. But these path prediction modeling from the NOAA or the NOAA, they give you really good insight of where your balloon's going to happen. And they also are also really cool because the amount of math that goes into them. It's very complex of all the variables that are taken account into for putting up these predictions.
Yeah, and also it just shows you, talk about meteorology a little bit. And that's also very interesting for kids. That's what I kind of focused on when I did a presentation at my local elementary school, because it was kids that were so young, from like the ages like 8 to 9. I focused on the meteorology side of it. And so we talked about wind, and we talked about, the sun, and how does the sun affect the wind, and how does the wind affect the balloon, and all that fun stuff. So yeah, path prediction on HabHub is pretty fun. And I think this was the time, we were able to pick up our own balloon on Whisper, which was pretty cool, from our house. And I'll let Jack let you talk about WSJTX.
Yeah, so WSJTX, or Weak Signal Joe Taylor, actually it was created by Joe Taylor, who is a Nobel Prize laureate, especially in astrophysics and pulsar detection in outer space. And of course, pulsars, I mean, if you're from Earth here and you're trying to see the signal coming from a pulsar, it's going to be pretty hard to. So, weak signal counters into that. And so this is especially where we run FT8. And so, as you can see right here, Audrey was able to pick up my balloon right here on 20 meters on 14.097, which is the frequency for Whisper. So, again, about the path predictions, our balloon, as I said, when it was going over northern Canada, it took a pretty interesting path where it went over several spots of the northern warning system, which is the successor of the dew line. And the dew line and northern warning system were basically two warning systems in detection of incoming, at least during dew line times, Soviet or communist ICBMs, nuclear missiles coming to America, and so a warning system for that. But now they're replaced with a northern warning system, which is up north, very cold. But our balloon took a path and it went over like 3 or 4 of them, right on top of them. And so the stations were definitely picking us up, but I bet they were definitely on high alert when they saw, because our balloon was going 100 miles per hour sometimes. So seeing our balloon like this size going at 100 miles per hour, could raise a few eyebrows. So luckily it wasn't
deep too. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily it wasn't, taken down or anything, but very interesting to know about, especially when you see your balloon going over those areas.
Fortunately, you didn't start World War III.
Fortunately, that's a good point. We did go over the demilitarized zone, very close to it a couple times. So I was, yeah, I'm definitely sure there was somebody somewhere saying, "What is that?" So, I mean, it did. When it did go down, it went down at nighttime. Where it was over some state park in the eastern part of China, I believe.
Yes.
And it went down at nighttime over there. So we didn't get to see, look at the data and really see what happened to it. But something happened to it, whether, like to theorize, maybe it got hit by an airplane. But it was a mysterious end. But we're happy it made it that far. And this little picture of Jack, this is his whole setup. We're very excited for him to go to Yoda. And just tomorrow, I think you guys are going to start driving. They will be going up to the Voice America Museum for the Yoda Region 2 summer camp, helping out Neil Rapp, who is pretty much the director for Region 2 Yoda. He's a really fun guy, and it's going to be basically a ton of kids teaching a ton of other kids about ham radio. So we have Ruth Willett came for LAO talking about satellites. We have Jack talking about HAPs. We have Bryant Rascal, who's a big contester, talking about contesting and doing all that. And we hope that I wish Jack a ton of luck, and wish I could be there. But I know he'll do great, and I hope everyone keeps an eye out for his balloons, but I'm sure he'll do great. So, yeah.
Thank you, Audrey. Yeah, definitely have high hopes for the Cincinnati, for Yoda, and especially about teaching such a large group. And I think it will be really fun. I just love teaching kids. I've done to maybe like a friend or two, but this is really big, especially teaching a whole class and launching balloons with them, and them even building the Mylar balloons. So that'd be really fun to watch them, release the balloons and see them hopefully, make orbits around the world. That'd be awesome to see.
Hey, Jack, Audrey, for the Yoda, that stands for Youth on the Air.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't. Yeah. I'm so used to throwing around these acronyms. Yeah.
It's
Youth on the Air.
For the Yoda group that you can post in the chat if people want to find out more about Youth on the Air.
Definitely.
And what day are you going to fly, and how many balloons, and what type of balloons at the Yoda event in Ohio?
Well, we plan on launching a 1 HEB or 1 latex balloon, and we'll be having the payload as an Arduino tracker, which will measure barometric pressure, temperature, and internal temperature of the payload, external temperature of outside of the payload, and then humidity inside of the payload as well. And so we can use that data, and hopefully we can teach the kids, that would be a great way to teach them about, atmospheric conditions, especially going up, teach them about how air density goes down, how humidity changes, how temperature goes down. So we'll be launching one HEB, and then with Mylar balloons, we're planning on launching 4 Mylar balloons. And with these Mylar balloons, since they're pretty easy to handle, to manipulate, the kids will be building them. But we'll have the balloons, pretty inflated, ready to go, and they'll have the payload, and they'll attach it. They'll be the ones launching it. So that is our plan for launching balloons at the Yoda event.
And what day will that all occur?
That'll all occur on July 13th, of course, 2021 this year. And so basically tomorrow we'll be leaving for the event. And so on July 13th, so part of the time will be taken up by building the balloons, and another part will be part of teaching about balloons, and another part of time will be, of course, chasing the fallen HEB payload with the parachute on it.
And it's at the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting.
Yes.
It's a fascinating place all on its own, just off the Interstate 75 between Cincinnati and Dayton, right?
Yes, Voice of America Museum is in Westchester Township, and that's where most of the classes will be taking place. And so there are many kids teaching all the kids there about all forms. I just said there'll be contesting satellites, and it'll be balloons, and so we'll be doing it at the Voice of America Museum. And there's big flat areas that we'll be launching from. But the Voice of America itself has, as you said, Bill, it's a great place to learn. There's so much stuff, not just about some ham radio, but also communications going along ages, especially with just first all the way to the modern iPhones that we just have in our hands wherever we want them to.
I'm going to post the call signs for all your flights because I just programmed them and sent them to you. It's there already at the museum. The other package I sent with 4 trackers arrived in Atlanta, and then the next day it said it was in New Orleans. And it's sitting in New Orleans ever since. And that was next day air U.S. Postal Service. So this time I sent it UPS, and it got there in one day. So I'm going to send this call signs out. I got to get the list here of what you're flying on Tuesday.
You should have a lot of fun at that Voice of America museum. I've been there when they were first converting it, and they had already taken the antennas down. So you're going to launch from the front of it. Is that what the plan is at the moment?
Yes, you'll be launching from the front of it. There's not many trees there. It's pretty big, open, flat space, and so we'll be launching from there. And
it's a big open space. Yeah, it was kind of neat.
Yeah, it'll also be a great place for the kids to gather around, because we'll not just be teaching inside, but we'll also be doing some part of teaching outside, because that's it's some parts of ballooning you can't just teach on a whiteboard. You also got to teach it hands-on. Teach them about like filling a balloon, teach them about balancing it, all of that.
Yep. Good work. Both of you. Great work.
Does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns?
So the 4 Pico balloons you're going to launch, will there be teams of students, and you're going to have a race? You're going to launch at the same time?
Yes. With the 4 Mylar balloons, it'll be split into groups. Of each group would have 1 Mylar balloon, and so yeah, it definitely will be a race to see who'll make it. Hopefully, all the balloons make it around the world. Well, if it being in Ohio, it's definitely different flight patterns that the balloons will be taking than where we are in Georgia. And so with that, it's hard to plan on where our balloon's going to go. So, it may also be a good idea to maybe, just look ahead of time, weather reports, all of that. So, there's also a good bit of preparing they need to do before you launch a balloon.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think I'm personally looking forward. There we go. Bill Brown posted all that stuff about the balloons that they will be launching. I'm looking forward to them. I hope you guys will check in on them. And I'm wishing Jack the best of luck with everything. And I know he'll do great. And I know all the kids will learn a ton from him. And I hope in our little presentation here that you got a little bit of what not only we do, but what can be done a little bit in the classrooms as well to help roll the curriculum into amateur radio and into ballooning and just how to, have fun. So, yeah.
I convinced your dad to actually put his call sign on one of the trackers. So he's going to be on the latex balloon for the Yoda events.
Oh, good. Okay. Nice.
Well, thank you both for that presentation. It was it's great to see it from your perspective, and it was a lot of fun. So thank you.
Well, thank you for letting us present it here, and we're also have a huge thanks to Bill Brown for supplying us the sky trackers for the HAB and the 4-miler balloons. As those are basically the integral part of all the balloons, and basically all balloons in general, not just our event that we'll be attending.
And I also want to do a shout out to Ron Meadows, K6 RPT, who just joined us. He may have been here earlier, but I just saw his screenshot. He's the manufacturer, along with his son Lee, of the SPS 13s.
That's awesome. Thank you for making the balloons. They're excellent balloons. We, our family especially, love them because 13 kilometers, we think perfect height for balloons, and also we find it such a joy to just see them go off and just see them float away.